welcome to EyeOpener, powered by Siemens. And now, please welcome your host, Gugan Sanger.
I'm delighted to welcome Nathaniel Ford from Senseye to this episode where we are going to be discussing the biggest misconceptions around predictive maintenance. So, big welcome to Nathaniel.
Hello.
If you could start off by introducing yourself to our audience, that would be great.
Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Nathaniel Ford. I'm Sales Director in the UK for Senseye and now part of Siemens. I've been with the company for 4 years. Actually, I say that it's 4 years this week, so exactly 4 years. I don't know if anybody's listening to this has listened to any of the podcasts, but one of the reasons that I think I have the right to pontificate for an hour about predictive maintenance and any of the facets of it, we in sales have a kind of privileged position where we get to be involved with clients from before they know they're going to be a client to the point at which they've scaled across many factories in many countries. So we're involved right from the beginning of working with yourself, Gugan, and Niall and people in marketing, and working out how we're going to get the right kind of messaging out in front of people and how we're going to get the right kind of conversations going. And the process of then going and working with those, I guess, leads as they come in, and turning them into opportunities and turning them into existing clients. And as a result, we're exposed to all the good stuff and all the bad stuff and all the wins and the losses. And we're exposed to all of the topic for today, the misperceptions about predictive maintenance, what it can be, what it might be, what it should be, what it definitely isn't. And in part, a very large part of my job and people in sales is to help to understand what the misunderstandings are, and to find the best way of communicating what the actual truth as we perceive it to be is. Because without doing that, you can end up in a real hot mess with clients because they can have all sorts of perceptions. So that's me. I'm Nathaniel, and I'm very glad to join you today to talk about some of those aspects.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have you on the show. And I guess let's get straight into it and this whole topic about, the biggest misconceptions around predictive maintenance.
Okay. Should I give you an overview of what I think they are before we dive into them?
Of course, yeah, that would be great.
Okay, well, pretty much every part of what we do, I think any sales process for any product or any company looking at new topics, well, there will be misconceptions, misperceptions that they have that need to find ways of alleviating and ruling out. But I think this is a really kind of special industry for this kind of stuff. And it falls into categories around what the product is, what it should do, how you use it, and how you trial it, right? So that's pretty much everything. And I think before we get into that, I think a lot of the issues around misunderstandings related to predictive maintenance come from the fact that, whether we like it or not, we're still quite early in the days of AI. I'm going to say the full name, artificial intelligence. One of the reasons that I wanted to come and work for Senseye specifically was that I worked for 5 years for an information security organisation, for a membership organisation, and we used to run a lot of events and host webinars and all sorts of things. And people would come and talk all sorts of terrible topics and terrible frightening things that were going to happen with AI.
Yeah.
Completely unsubstantiated with any facts. It was all sort of future gazing, but never really offering any interesting solutions for the market. And what I really liked about Senseye was the fact that it had a solution that was grounded, that was solving a business problem with a tool. And actually, if you think about it, you don't need to talk about AI or machine learning when you're describing what Senseye does. It might be helpful sometimes, but realistically, we're solving a business issue. The reason I'm mentioning that is because I think that the public perception or the individual perceptions of what artificial intelligence is and what it promises and what machine learning, sounds so grandiose, doesn't it? What those things are going to help them achieve.
Yeah.
Coupled with things like predictive maintenance, prediction, is so exciting, isn't it? I think it totally misleads people. And I've been in sales for over 30 years, and I've never before sold a product where when you turn up to a meeting with a room full of people, you're not competing against the usual suspects, which are lack of budget, lethargy, and a bunch of other providers. you're competing against this fantasy that they have in their head of what could be achieved. Because after all, this is artificial intelligence, it's AI, it's the thing that's going to take all our jobs and revolutionize the universe.
Yeah.
And candidly, it's not, right? I can't speak for ChatGPT and some of the crazy stuff that's happening at the moment, but in the world of predictive maintenance, the fact that it's, is it artificial? Is it intelligence? Arguably no. Is it predictive maintenance? It's really more about good maintenance. So we need to strip back and we need to get rid of this kind of excitement of thinking about what this stuff could be and let people understand what it really is now, not in the factory of the future, not kind of based on next gen AI, but what is it now and what can be achieved. And a lot of, so as I say, I think a lot of the misunderstandings stem from those initial kind of over expectations.
Yeah.
And so they stem into three main areas. First of all, the idea that you might have this wholesale cultural change, that a company like Senseye will come in and redesign their universe. Totally, so they'll go from having one group of maintenance engineers to having sort of these space age people who fly in on hovercrafts and affect change guided by whatever. That's not what's going to happen. Right, there's going to be. We could talk more in depth about this, but so that's the issue around cultural change. The other is that this technology is about this incredibly specific prediction of future events.
Yeah.
Which sounds marvelous, doesn't it? If you're logging into your computer and discovering that something is going to break at a very specific time in a very specific manner. But that's really, I can't remember the names of the guy, was it Marty from Back to the Future? That's really the preserve of that stuff. You don't need to know.
Yeah.
You don't need to know that stuff. So we should talk about that as well. So cultural change, this idea that it's this thing about accurate prediction when it should be about maintenance, we can talk about. And just looking at my notes just to make sure I don't forget the other important things. So the other misunderstanding is around how, when it should be consumed.
Yeah. And
how you should start a project. There is this sort of idea that everybody comes up with by themselves, that predictive maintenance should be tested in very small, controlled environments for very small periods of time, and that's incorrect. And we can discuss why that's incorrect. But they're the three main areas, and there's a whole plethora of other stuff which we could look at.
Okay, no, perfect, sounds good. And just touching on the topic, I know you mentioned, so these are, we'll go into more detail around them. But do you feel with this whole topic of predictive maintenance, it started to become quite overwhelming? And that's why a lot of these misconceptions are created, because, people are thinking about problems when they haven't occurred, or issues that haven't occurred either. So it just makes me kind of, ask you the question around, I think people make this assumption that predictive maintenance is very complex and there's all these problems which may occur.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I think that's, and that feeds into the idea that people have an assumption about what they're going to see. They think you're going to come and install a product that may flood them with this sort of future gate, where they can peer into the future and see all these negative things that are going to happen. Yeah. They're going to be responsible for fixing them ahead of time. And of course, that's not the case. And then your question, perhaps it's a good time then to look in a bit more depth about what we mean, or what I mean, when I say that it's not about accurate long-term prediction of failure. If you imagine, it's a slightly crash scenario, but I use it anyway. So we had the village I live in, a couple of years ago, we had a new doctor joined. And if we were going to have the equivalent approach with the doctor, we would want him to turn up and be able to predict with great accuracy when we were all going to die and what we're going to die from. Nathaniel is going to have a heart attack in 3 years and 7 months, and it's going to be because of X, Y, and Z. And of course, I don't want to know that. I want that outcome to be a variable that changes depending on my lifestyle.
Yeah.
I don't need him to say fixed in stone when something is. What I need him to do is to be very good at telling me and other people in the village, generally speaking, what our health is. And if there are sort of signs that things are happening that may lead to a number of different negative potential outcomes that we can mitigate by making changes now.
Making changes, yeah.
And that's exactly the same scenario as ourselves. So we're often asked to come into an organisation and give very accurate prediction about when a piece of machinery might fail. But frankly, who cares? We're going to avoid that feature. So let's not obsess about this accurate prediction. That'd be a waste of development time.
Yeah.
Now, I need to come back to this point because we do actually, under certain circumstances, do that. So I don't want to do ourselves out of some kind of applause for being able to do something, but we'll come back to that. We need to be able to provide a much more generalist service of alerting people to change. And that alert to change doesn't need to be terrifying. We're not giving this kind of future journal of what's going to go wrong. We're just allowing people to be informed that change is occurring, which could potentially lead to a number of negative outcomes. So it might be some damage to a bearing, something simple, something small. And their corresponding action is to consider that thing, have a discussion in the way that they normally would, and perhaps go and investigate.
Yeah.
And they may take an action. They may do something to mitigate. And the story should end there, and it should be a very boring story. So the headline for us is case raised to small amount of change. Maintenance person mitigates said problem. The end. Which, frankly, for internal marketing to our clients can be difficult. But what I'm saying is actually those things en masse, when people see them, shouldn't be scary and shouldn't be overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I think the when people become overwhelmed by the idea of what it is they might be purchasing, it's because they've fundamentally misunderstood what it is that they're going to be faced with.
And I think this is the other part of it. I think people make that assumption, you know, when there is a problem, this is going to essentially fix that problem and it's never going to come back. And
right.
People are more focused on that as opposed to this whole process of working towards something. We all just get fixated on this is the problem, this is what needs to be fixed, and your energy and your focus is just based on that asset, for example.
Yes, that's sort of true. So I think this allows people to be more relaxed about, well, relaxed is probably the wrong term. It allows them to be more focused in wherever they're putting their energy.
Yeah.
But not because they're neurotically observing things that might go wrong, just because they're in control. I mean, so our system, or a predictive maintenance system, should be all about giving people better decision-making processes,
yes,
better control. So if you're going to extrapolate from this idea that you're not neurotically observing the future, you're actually observing the present and reacting to it and making changes to avoid bad features. If you get that right, the knock-on effect is that you can then have a much more precise and controlled maintenance process. So you put the maintenance team in better charge, and they're not doing as you say, they're not obsessing about aspects about it. Yeah. So they should be very grateful.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Which is another topic. Quite often they're not, because they're terrified, as you say, about the things coming down the line. So an important part of our function is to make sure that everybody involved in the project understands actually what it is that we're providing, so they can see that it's a decision support tool that will benefit their role.
I think ultimately it's making it so much easier for them.
Yeah.
And like you said, you know, that's what we do. Exactly,
and that's probably a good moment then to talk about the cultural change piece. And we're as much to blame for this as any other provider and any company that has a big division that deals with cultural change. So the idea is that, you know, if you successfully implement a new technology that changes a process, that in order for that process to be successful, you also need to have some way of managing the job tasks and the roles and the way people work with the product, and that's usually encapsulated as some kind of cultural change.
Yeah.
This is me personally. I'm not speaking for anybody but me, but I think it's a bit grandiose to say you're going to affect a cultural change. It's just a software tool. You know, we're not going in and doing something to or with the employees of a company to affect some big step change. In fact, my view is it's exactly the opposite. We want to observe how their culture is currently and slipstream into it,
yeah,
so they can adopt our processes and product without really any disruption. I mean, a cultural change sounds deeply disruptive and should probably be reserved for a company buyout or, you know, integrating ourselves with Siemens as we are at the moment. You know, you can see there'll be some cultural change over time. not for the adoption of one of many software solutions.
Yeah.
I don't want to put ourselves down, but that's
where
we are, right?
Yeah.
So we actually, as part of our project delivery about 1.5 years ago, started to take note of the fact that we didn't have 1,000 users at every site. We had key users, and those key users were disseminating the information and feeding it to the right people. And we've tried to emulate that through the way that we're now producing what we do. So the question that me and other people in the sales process and pre-sales will ask a company is, how do you work currently? What's your daily maintenance process? Do you have stand-ups?
Yeah.
How do you make decisions about what to do? What is your maintenance methodology? And the answer that we will invariably give to their description is, well, this is, bring us in and we can appear here, or we can appear there, or you can take the cases that are raised and have them appear in Teams if that's where you do most of your work, or we can integrate with an existing CMMS they might have built, whatever it is.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that the Senseye-ness of it becomes less important, the implementation becomes unimportant. It's just the cases that arise that are important, and that they appear at the right time so people can incorporate them into conversations about asset health and make decisions about activities, and then affect outcomes. Our best route to success with a client is to try not to disturb their culture at all, but to try and add value over time by assimilating with it.
I think I completely agree with your point, because there is all this talk about cultural change. There is all this talk about, when you're, say, for example, companies implementing a software or a tool which is going to assist with a problem that they have. I think it's inevitable, but to actually make a point and say, when it comes to within the people who are working as part of that team, they do make that assumption that this could essentially replace an individual. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think it's just that whole, and you touched on artificial intelligence and AI, and we touched on, the future of robots, for example, and they will replace individuals working within a team.
Yeah.
I think that's an assumption as well that people tend to make when it comes to implementing a software. But
and I think especially in industries like manufacturing, where there's been waves of reduction in human footprint, and because of the introduction of new technology. But I think with this wave, with this specific type of solution, what we see is it is just about the value add and adding extra input to the existing team and the decisions they make, and getting more value from them.
Yeah.
So if you look at the projects that we've run over a number of years, so for example Nissan, you will see that there has not been a change upward or downward of the number of personnel working on these projects. There is change in other aspects and other measures they might look at, like OEE and uptime and unplanned downtime and all the kind of things that you might measure success on in a project, but not on the individuals.
Yeah.
And that's a really difficult point to get across to maintenance teams. And what tends to happen is, roughly speaking, there'll be sort of five different groups of people you speak to when you're first engaging with a business. And the kind of poor cousin tends to be the maintenance team, because they won't necessarily be involved from an IT perspective or a budget perspective or an overall plant, what are we trying to achieve for the next 3 years, or factory of the future kind of stuff. But they're definitely the users. So sometimes they get pulled into these projects at a stage where they're not privy to the discussions where that kind of stuff's revealed. So you're right, all they'll see is change, cultural change coming.
Yeah, that's it. This is what I'm saying. It is one of the biggest assumptions to make.
To find out more, search Senseye Predictive Maintenance.